today I'm going to be walking through how to make this fully reversible tie back top. I have made the pattern available on Etsy. It's called my coral pattern, and I've tried to make everything as beginner friendly as possible. So let's get on with the tutorial. So for this project you will need two different colours or styles of fabric. I'm going to be using a 4-way stretch fabric. This is 95% cotton, 5% elastane, and this is from Jelly Fabrics for both of them. You could also definitely use woven fabric for this project. You would just want to size up on the pattern, and you might also want to add a dart to the halter front as well. You will also need pins, some fabric scissors or something to cut out your pattern pieces, and fabric pens or something to draw out your pattern pieces. So the pattern that I'm going to be using for this one is my coral pattern, and I have 3 pattern pieces for this. So the first pattern is the front of the band. The second pattern is the front halter piece. So this is where you would add a dart just up the middle of this if you wanted to use woven fabric. And then the pattern 3, which is the tie back. So I'm going to start by taking my 2 fabrics and laying them with right sides facing together. This creamy kind of colour doesn't have a right or wrong side, it's just the same on both sides. But this orange one does have a right side, so it's just plain on one side. So I'm going to take this white fabric and lay it straight on top of this orange fabric. So now that I've got one piece laid on top of the other, I'm going to take my pattern pieces and start to draw them out. So for the front band piece, I'm just going to draw one of these onto my fabric, which is going to give me one in each fabric. There are also 2 marks on this pattern that are going to show you where to attach the front halter to here. So you want to mark those onto your pattern as you're drawing them out as well. And then for pattern 2, you need to draw 2 of these onto your fabric. That way you have 2 in each fabric once you cut them out. And this also has a mark that's going to show you where this piece attaches to the front band. So you want to mark that onto your pattern pieces as well. And then for pattern 3, which is the tie back, you will also need to draw this out twice so that you have 2 in each fabrics. But you need to flip the pattern halfway through drawing them out. So you're going to draw 1 in this orientation and then flip it and draw 1 in the opposite orientation. This is so that you have 1 tie back for each side of the top. So that's all of my pieces drawn out. I don't think I could have done that in a less efficient way if I tried. So I've got 2 pieces for the tie back in opposite orientations, 2 pieces for the halter front, and I have the mark in place that tells me how to attach it to the front band, and then just 1 piece for the band, and again I've got my marks in place. So before I cut these out, I'm just going to take some pins and pin within all those lines that I've just drawn out. This is going to make it easier to cut both layers at the same time, trying to make sure we get the same rough shape between both pieces of fabric, and this is going to help get as close as possible. So I'm just going to finish adding all of my pins just inside my lines, and then I'm going to cut each piece out. Just take your time with this. The fabric can tend to move about a bit if you're using stretch fabric, so just go nice and slowly and be as precise as you can. So this is how everything looks once it's cut out. You should have 5 pieces cut out, but each piece will have 2 layers, so it's 10 in total. And just make sure again that the 2 of these that you've got are facing in opposite directions. So I'm going to start by working on my halter pieces. So I'm going to put everything else to one side. And the first thing I'm going to do with both of these is I'm going to take my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to just sew straight up each side and along this top edge. The only edge that I'm not going to sew along is this bottom edge, because that's where it's going to attach to the front band. So I'm just going to go straight up the side, across the top here, and back down this side. So I'm going to use my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. So that's how that piece should look once you have sewn along the edges. So now I'm going to take this piece and turn it to the right side out. So just folding it through this way, and then once it's the right way out, it will look something like this. So now I'm going to go in with a top stitch along these edges that I've just sewn. So I'm just going to go up this side and up this side. I'm not going to do anything at this end here because I won't need to. This is optional. You can skip this part if you want, but it will just help this piece to sit a little bit flatter and take out some of the bulk. So just using my regular machine, I'm going to set it to the middle size of my zigzag stitch. So I'm just going to take one of these halter pieces and place that under my needle. I'm just going to slowly follow that seam around. Just make sure that you reverse to secure that stitch. So I'm just going to carry on doing that all the way up this side. And then again, I'm just going to reverse at this end as well. So that should look something like this. And I'm just going to repeat that for the other side as well. So this is how my two halter pieces are looking now that I've added the top stitch in. I've also just pressed them with an iron just to make sure they're sitting as flat as possible. Now I'm going to take my front band piece and I'm just going to remove these pins. And I'm going to find this mark that I've got and make sure that it's on both layers of the fabric. It's just going to make this part a little bit easier. So now I'm going to take this halter piece and flip it with right sides facing together and match up the mark on the halter piece to the mark on the front band. And then I'm going to pin that in place. This doesn't have to match up perfectly. As long as you get it in the right kind of place, it will look fine once you finish the top. So now I'm just going to take my second piece and do the same thing. I'm actually just going to zoom in a little bit. So it's probably a little bit tricky to see, but I've got my mark here on my front band and then my mark here on my halter piece. I'm just going to match them up as close as I can and pin those layers together. And I'm going to take this white piece that I had on top and lay that back over the top and just make sure that these marks match up. I'm going to pin that straight across the top. You can actually take these ones out that are just attaching the halter to this back piece. You can use them to pin the white piece in place as well. And now that's all pinned in place, I'm just going to sew straight across here. I'm going to use my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. And that's how that looks once you've sewn across that top edge. Now I'm just going to fold these halter neck pieces up inside here. It doesn't really matter how you do it, just as long as you get it up inside here. I'm actually going to pin that as well, just to make sure it doesn't get in the way of the seam we're going to sew at the bottom. I'm going to do the same with this side as well. And now I'm just going to pin along this bottom edge. Very similar to how I did along the top, but this time you've not got the halter neck to pin in place as well. And then once that's all pinned in place, I'm just going to go and do the same thing as I did across the top, just sew straight across here with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch. So that's with the bottom edge sewn in place. And now you don't need to do this, but I'm just going to turn it to the right side out just to check that everything is sewn in place correctly. Because for the next step that we do with this one, we are going to want it to be inside out like it just was. But I think it's nice to just go in and check. So that all looks about right to me. So now I'm going to move on to make the tie back. So now taking my two tie back pieces, I'm going to do essentially the same thing as I did on the halter necks for these ones. So I'm going to sew down this edge along the end and then back up this edge. The only edge that I'm going to be leaving open is this side here, which is going to be your side seam. So on both of them, I just want to sew straight down the long edges along this end here and then straight back up here. So I'm going to do that with my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. So then once you've sewn along those edges, you want to turn this piece to the right side out, and then you should have two pieces that look like this. And now I'm just going to bring back my front of my top, and if you turned it to the right side out like I did, I'm just going to turn it back inside out. This bit is quite awkward to do, but it should be easy enough to follow. You want to make sure that your halter neck pieces are inside. So now once you have this piece inside out, I'm going to take one of my tie back pieces, so obviously finding the relevant one, considering that this is the side seam. So this one is going to go on this side, and you want to make sure that you've got the right fabric facing each other. So here I know that I've got my orange fabric at the top and I've got it at the top here. So now you just want to kind of scrunch this up inside here. Like I said, it's a little bit awkward to do because obviously you've already got all of the halter necks in there, but it should fit. And then finding this edge that is your side seam, you want to pin that along the same side seam of your front piece that is inside out. And here you're going to be pinning through 4 layers of fabric. Just pin down that edge. You want to make sure that you've not got anything in the way of this end seam, because you don't want to sew anything into the seam, for example the halter neck pieces. So I've just got that pinned in place there. Obviously this is very bulky here, you can see, and now I'm going to do the same with the other strap. If you want this to be a little bit easier, well, just for one side it will be easier, you can pull everything through and out this hole to do your first seam, and then this will be the only one that will be a little bit more awkward and bulky. I'm going to do them both at the same time, but it's up to you if you want to do one at a time. And then again, with doing this one, make sure that you've got the same fabrics at the top. So I've got my orange here, and that means that I'm going to have orange facing orange, which is what you want to aim for. And again, make sure that everything is kind of like folded out of the way, and kind of push everything inside of there. And then again, finding both of these side seams, you want to pin them together. So this is how you should be looking. You've kind of just got a tube that's full of all of your pieces, and I'm going to sew down each of these side seams. I'm going to use my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. Just make sure as you're doing it that you get all 4 layers of fabric and that you aren't getting any of this bulk that's in here within your seam. So just be very careful as you do this part. So I'm just going to take my top and literally just sew straight down this edge, just making sure that I get all 4 layers and that I'm not getting any of the rest of the stuff that's inside here. I'll just place this under my needle and sew straight down here. And just having a look to make sure it looks like I've got all 4 layers, and it does. So I'm just going to repeat that for the other side as well. So that's how it looks with the side seams sewn in place. And now everything is completely enclosed. I need to turn this to the right side out. So I'm just going to unpick a small hole in this bottom edge. You won't need much of a hole here, just enough to pull things through. I'm just keeping this kind of to the side and out the way, but you don't want to come too close to this side seam. So I think this hole should be big enough, so I'm going to use that to turn the top to the right side out. If you've used a zigzag stitch for your seams, you might want to reinforce that hole on either side before you start to do this, just to make sure it doesn't come undone. So that's how the top looks once it's turned to the right side out. Now the top is very nearly done. There's just a couple of things that you might want to do here. So I'm going to add a top stitch just along here and along the tie backs, and then along the bottom as well. That is completely optional. It's just going to help these areas to sit a little bit flatter. And if you do decide to add a top stitch, you can just kind of fold this in on itself and go over it with the top stitch, so you won't need to close that in another way. But if you do decide you want to skip the top stitch, you can close this up with a ladder stitch by hand. If you're not 100% sure how to do that, there are a lot of YouTube tutorials available that can tell you, but I'm going to use my top stitch, so I'm going to go in and start to do that now. So I'm actually just going to use a straight stitch for this top stitch. You can use a zigzag stitch if you want, like we did on the halter neck. That will keep all of your stretch in your fabric, but I'm going to use a straight stitch because it will reduce the stretch a tiny bit, which will help with the tie back not stretching. So I'm going to do exactly the same as I did for the halter pieces and just follow along the seams. So I'm going to start by following along the top of the front band. So that's the top section done, and now I'm going to go and do the bottom of this tie with the bottom of the front band as well. So I'm just sewing along the bottom of the front of the band now, and I'm coming along to where the hole is that we used to turn it to the right side out. I'm just going to make sure that that's all folded under, or folded in on itself. I'm going to continue straight over the top of that. And then I'm going to continue into the other side of the tie back. And then I'm just coming up to where I started here. I'm just going to sew straight over the top of that. So I've just finished adding my top stitch in, just to give you a little bit of a recap of where I've gone. I started here, come all the way along the band and the tie back. So I've come all the way down here, and then back up and along the bottom of the band, and then round and back to where I started here. So just across this whole section here, I just went round it. And then it might also help to press the edges after you finish that as well. I have gone ahead and done that. And then the top is finished and is fully reversible.